I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking all about the MTHFR gene variant. Over 80% of the population actually have this gene variant, and it's really important when you're on the fertility journey, especially if you've been dealing with recurrent loss. Also important for both men and women. So, we're going to be talking about the number one tip you need to know for MTHFR, and then certain blood markers, what to look for in supplements, some diet and lifestyle tips as well. So, everything you need to know about MTHFR if you are on the fertility journey. Let's go. Hey, Ricardo, excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, hi. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, excited to chat about this today. It's a really important topic that people on the fertility journey need to know more about. And there's a lot of information out there. And I know you have a very large database on MTHFR. But first of all, let's kind of like if you could share your story, kind of how you came to do this work.
Sure. So I'm originally trained in Chinese medicine, and very interested in longevity. And years ago, I started implementing functional medicine with my Chinese medicine, and I went to a seminar on epigenetics, and I was very interested. And I found out in a seminar that our DNA is not our destiny. We can actually control the gene expression, and I was very fascinated by. So I start, studying, researching about that. That's when I got into methylation, because that's the process that controls. I said, I want to know how to control my destiny, and it led me to methylation. And I decided I want to know how to control methylation. So I started researching more, and led me to MTHFR. So that's what it led me to. And I, since then I studied. I've been fascinated with the subject, and I wanted to share as much as I can with about MTHFR and what it controls and what it's not, doesn't control, and that's my story.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think it's one of those ones where it even has that little, negative connotation, the mother F or whatever, with the people hearing like,
Yes,
"Oh my
yes,
goodness, what is this?" Um,
exactly.
and so, and so, what? So, for someone that's trying to conceive, both female and male, because we support, it's couples that we work with on the fertility journey. Typically people we work with have premature ovarian insufficiency, diminished ovarian reserve, so that low AMH and high FSH. And then also with that being, couples, we're seeing 50-50, even though they think it's many people will say it's just me as the female partner. There's always things we can do to improve his preconception health, and being it more
Yes.
50-50, sometimes there's things going on in his semen analysis. So what's the importance and the significance of the MTHFR gene variant or mutation for fertility?
Sure. So you're right, and MTHFR has been linked to uh, infertility on men and women, by the way. And there are various reasons why MTHFR may be linked to infertility in women, but and also miscarriage, by the way. And I think one of the things that I haven't heard people talk about that is important, especially for miscarriage, is the connection with MTHFR and thyroid hormone activation, for example. So we know that if your TSH is high, if you have hypothyroidism, it will affect the pregnancy, right? And not many people talk about MTHFR and thyroid hormone activation. So we have receptors, for example, for thyroid hormone in the whole body, and thyroid hormone is activated in the nucleus of the cells, in the DNA. So you need methylation, transferation, acetylation to activate the thyroid hormone. So methylation is directly related to thyroid hormone activation. And if you have a problem with methylation, with MTHFR directly affects methylation, even though your thyroid markers may be all normal, if you don't activate, you may still have a problem with the thyroid hormone, and that may affect on miscarriage. So that's a point that I think it was important to mention. Um, and obviously, there's a relation between MTHFR and homocysteine that affects on fertility as well.
Yeah. So definitely, we see a lot of people. I'd almost say like 100% of people we work with, there's something going on with the thyroid, be it the hypothyroidism, be it Hashimoto's, be it Graves', be it like subclinical thyroid issues, and then testing. So we do genetics testing as well, looking at a female hormone panel, and they also have male hormone panels. We start with the female one, and is looking at the methylation pathway. So it's like super. Then we can then do that targeted diet and lifestyle and supplement recommendations. So it's not just, so it's a very personalized approach, because many times
Yeah,
people are doing these generalized things, are they right for you? Um, and so what,
exactly. And the personalized approach is key to everything in health, yes.
absolutely. And so some of the studies around here, what are you seeing? So can you just dig into the miscarriage piece with the MTHFR, what you're seeing there? Around studies. And then there's some studies here around sperm and egg development that I'll share a little bit too. But if you can maybe talk about the miscarriage one.
Yes, as I said, from my perspective, I think one of the big pieces is the correlation on thyroid hormone activation and MTHFR that we really need to look into optimizing methylation. And then brings me to another piece. A lot of people look at homocysteine as the main marker for methylation. But even though it's an important marker for methylation, but it should not be the main one, and I'll explain how right now. Because homocysteine can give you a false negative. So if you look at homocysteine and homocysteine is high, and then if it's a positive, yes, we know it's off. But if homocysteine is normal, for example, is normal, it doesn't necessarily mean the methylation is working, and I'll explain why. For example, MTHFR, if you have let's say a homozygous mutation on MTHFR C677T, it raises homocysteine. But there's another gene, for example, the CBS gene, CBS6C699T, which is cystathionine beta synthase gene. If you have a homozygous mutation there, it will lower homocysteine. So you could have somebody that has mutations on those, and the MTHFR makes homocysteine to go high, but the CBS makes homocysteine go low, and it will look normal. So if you just look at a homocysteine in the lab, you say, oh, homocysteine normal, methylation is fine, there's no issue here. But no, maybe the homocysteine is low because the CBS is pushing it down, but you're not turning homocysteine into methionine. That's what MTHFR does. MTHFR, turns homocysteine into methionine by attaching a methyl group, but the CBS turns homocysteine into cystathionine, which is the transsulfuration pathway, not the methylation pathway. So if you just look at homocysteine, is not enough. So you need to look at homocysteine, and homocysteine is normal. Okay, if we don't have access to the CBS, and most people we want have access to the CBS gene. So the most cost-effective way is to look at folate. Okay, and then when you look at folate, we need to factor in the MTHFR mutation, because when you look at folate on the blood work, for example, it measures all types of folate, including unmetabolized folate. So we can't just take the folate that we see on blood work as the folate that the patient is absorbing. So we have to look at a folate, and if they have, for example, no mutation at all, okay, so that folate, that's what the patient has. But what if the patient has the worst mutation, which is the double mutation? In simple terms, the double mutation on the worst allele, which is the MTHFR C677T, for example. The patient will lose 70%, roughly, of their ability to metabolize that folate. So if you look at, they may have, at the worst case scenario, they may have 30% of what it shows. In reality, they'll have a little bit more, because when you're measuring all types of folate, there's a little bit of metabolized folate as well. But with that said, if you do not know if you have a mutation or not and what type of mutation, you don't really know the amount of folate that you have if the patient's really utilizing all that. Make sense? So that is why we need to look. Okay, so let's find out. Let's look at methylation, see how methylations work, and then look at homocysteine. But with that in mind, we look at homocysteine to see if it's If it's too high, we know it's fine. But if it's not, we look at a folate. And then we have to calculate based on a MTHFR mutation. And then we have the most accurate result for that, for folate, and find out for the assessment for MTHF, for methylation.
And let's just so clarify for everybody. So the homozygous versus the heterozygous, how do we know? What is that?
Okay. So if you have your lab test comes in and you got an MTHFR, we either show wild type or WT, which is the common type, which is no mutation. And then the patient may have either a heterozygous, which is one mutation, or a homozygous, which is two mutations. So depending on the lab that you use, you may also have, colors like our company that, we do MTHFR test. We have green, yellow, and red. For green is no mutation, yellow, one mutation, and red is two mutations. But some of the regular labs, they just, just print a black and white paper, and they just have either no mutation or also the term wild type, if that is used on the lab. So patient will know wild type means no mutation, basically. And then heterozygous is one mutation, homozygous, two mutations. Now, there's a variation if you have one, depending on what allele, there are two main alleles on MTHFR that we're looking into it for methylation. And you can have from one mutation on the lesser allele that the patient will lose roughly 20% of their ability to metabolize folate and folic acid, all the way up to 70%. It depends on what type of mutation. That's why I say you really need to see what type of mutation you have to calculate the folate, because if you have no mutation, you metabolize all of it, but you may lose 20%, you may lose 40%, you may lose 60%, you may lose 70%. So depending on what mutation you have.
Yeah, and approximately 60% of the population have this, correct?
Actually, it's more than that.
More now?
If you look at both alleles, it's 80% of the population.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You have at least one mutation of one of the two alleles. Now, the worst allele, the MTHFR C677T, approximately anywhere between 15 to 20% have that worst mutation, which is a large portion of the population. 15 to 20%, you may lose 70% of your ability to metabolize folate and folic acid. That's pretty significant. And then only about 20% of the population have no mutation. And that's why it is so important to take a look at it, because there's a good chance that you may lose some of your ability to metabolize folate and folic acid. And then if you do have a mutation, it comes to another part that I think is very important. That's my goal in life is to spread the word here, because of I believe, and there's a lot of research pointing in the correlation between MTHFR mutation and autism, for example, and also Down syndrome or autism. And for example, and I will explain that. If you look at the data from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control website, back in 1987, I believe, the occurrence rate for autism was 1 in 10,000. Okay. Fast forward to 2018, right on the Center for Disease Control website, occurrence rate, and that's, I'm talking about the United States. Occurrence rate for autism is 1 in 44, which is crazy. Now, there are a lot of researchers on the MTHFR field, and including me. We see a very strong correlation between MTHFR and autism, and I'll explain. In the early 1990s, the government started suggesting folic acid to prevent birth defect, which it does. Or, if the patient has a low folate level, so they implement with not only fortified foods with folic acid, but also all prenatal supplements to include folic acid. and it does prevent birth defect. However, if the patient has the MTHFR mutation and they take the folic acid, the unmetabolized folic acid becomes endogenous toxins. Now it stays in the space outside of the cell called the extracellular matrix, and the body needs to detoxify. Now, autism, it has to do with brain development, and most experts agree that it develops in utero. Okay? So there is a correlation of toxicity in the mother, and obviously, MTHFR is not the only cause. There are multiple causes, but I believe that's to be one of the causes. You have more toxicity that affects the brain development of the baby. So if they have MTHFR mutation, and if you look at the data, we start giving supplements containing folic acid indiscriminately to everyone, and the fortified foods, and it did prevent birth defect. But if you look at the data from the early 90s, that's when the autism rate started rising up to today. So we believe that MTHFR to be one of the causes. So it's my goal to bring this awareness and to replace folic acid with methylated folate, because there are many research that show that methylated folate works just as well as folic acid to prevent birth defect. But also there are research showing that for people with MTHFR mutation, methylated folate is a better option for that reason, because you have a metabolized folic acid. So it's my goal is to spread this as much as I can so that people become aware, and if they do take the methylated form of folate, I believe to be a better choice. And if we can have enough impact, I think it will bring down the occurrence rate of autism.
Yeah, definitely. I've done many episodes about the difference with folic acid and methylfolate, making sure you're taking methylfolate.
Yes.
And also there's an episode I did on autism. So definitely, MTHFR can be part of it, and other things as well. So definitely check out that episode in the catalog there. So, and also, so MTHFR, their variants are also associated with difficult conception and early pregnancy loss due to problems with the endometrium and implantation. IVF studies have shown that women with MTHFR mutations are more likely to experience recurrent implantation failure. I'll just read another one here. So sperm development. So, and I'll have you kind of maybe elaborate on this one. Some men with fertility problems have low MTHFR function in their sperm, and folate supplementation improves sperm count and fertility treatment success rates. Anything you wanted to say about sperm and then the MTHFR gene mutation or variant?
Not particularly on sperm only, but on the couple, which is interesting to say. That's one of my projects that I have, is to work with the Fertility Center to do a research on this, but I'm going to share with you. As I mentioned, you could have mutations that can lose from 20% to up to 70%. And we have never, we do MTHFR testing through our website, and we have never found anyone with 3 mutations or 4 mutations. Okay, theoretically you could have, and I have talked to different people in different labs, and there's even research that shows if you have either 3 or 4, the embryo is not viable because you just don't have enough mutation. The embryo dies. So looking at the couple, the worst combination genetically is if both men and women, they have what is called a compound heterozygous mutation, which is one mutation of each of the alleles. Okay, why is that? Because mathematically, if you have that, the embryo could end up with either 3 or 4 mutations, and then you have a higher incidence of infertility, or the embryo is not it's not viable. So I believe that, and that's a project that I have to do some research with the Fertility Center and document, so we can come up with a protocol in which, if we have couples with with that situation, and then we would come up with the right protocol and so forth. But that's something to look out, for that will impact on the especially if you're doing IVF and all.
Yeah, that's why it's the test, don't guess, like figure this out. And there's things you can do, like epigenetics, things you can do. It's not your destiny, right? There's diet, lifestyle,
Exactly.
proper supplementation to support this.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then the egg development and IVF study, the the C677T variant associated with premature oxytocin, I can never pronounce that word, retrieval, whereas the A1298C variant is associated with fewer retrievals. And then also there's the embryonic development. Folate provides a backbone for some DNA building blocks, so folate deficiency can affect cell division and cause birth defects. And then it's just...
It's very significant. MTHFR is very significant in the field of fertility and pregnancy and scare. We really need to look into that. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how does methylation impact estrogen? What are you seeing there? If there's someone's, we see even more estrogen dominance with sort of PMS and tender breasts and decreased sex drive and things like that.
Yeah. And I like to look always into MTHFR and COMT, which is another gene. COMT is the catechol O-methyltransferase gene that helps the body get rid of excess neurotransmitters such as dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, but also acts as estrogens. And and that's very important, especially for women, because of estrogen-related cancers, for example. So we want to make sure that a COMT enzyme is working well. If you have a mutation, it makes the enzyme slower. So we have more accumulation of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, which could cause anxiety, or estrogens, which you may have too much estrogens. And as I said, which is important to have a balance because of estrogen-related cancers. So a lot of women are taking estrogen because they need to. So we want to make sure that, I always like to look at a COMT, and then they take nutrients that support the COMT enzyme. If they have a mutation, that will make sure that is working well. And then, what are the nutrients? You need vitamin D, you need magnesium, you need methionine, and you need SEM-E. Now, methionine you can get from, eggs, fish, turkey, or you can take a supplement as well. So I like to look at both when it comes to estrogen. But yes, there is a significant one in MTHFR. Also, MTHFR, methylation affects every part of our body. So MTHFR has this relation to almost every function.
Yeah, so with the estrogen dominance, and then also with low estrogen, with like the hot flashes and irregular cycles and increase in UTIs and things like that. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the key is balance. We definitely don't want patients they're not methylating well, they're under methylating. But if you over supplement, and then all of a sudden you have a condition what's called over methylation, right? Which is a whole different that cause other problems as well. So we want to make sure that there's a balance.
And let's kind of circle back to that homocysteine level. So let's sort of, what are like the sort of the functional reference ranges? What are people looking at? And then you're talking about sort of some false negatives based on the methylation cycle. So, and then I guess if there's a blocked methylation cycle and the impact on fertility. So what are you seeing there with the high blood homocysteine?
Well, what I consider to be the functional level is 5 to 9. And most doctors that I talk to, they like their range. So I'm not going to get into the exact range. I'll let every doctor decide what they think is optimal, which is, functional level, what we think is the optimal level. But let's go from 5 to 9. If the homocysteine is high, and then we know it's high because it doesn't, even if whether they have or they don't have a mutation that lowers, it's either high or very high. So the positive is a positive. But if the homocysteine is either normal or low, which could be signifying over methylation, it does not necessarily mean they're really normal because we don't know what's happening with the CBS unless we have that reading on the gene, and then we can assess. But if we don't, instead of ordering a CBS gene and may cost $1,000, we can just look at the folate and estimate, based on the MTHFR mutation, and that's the more cost-effective way of estimating. Just look at homocysteine and look at folate levels.
Yeah, because it's not even standard of care to typically order the homocysteine. So many people aren't even getting that.
No, yeah. So they don't usually get it. Usually I have to, the patient needs to ask their doctor to request.
Yeah.
It's not standard at all.
No, yeah, we have a whole extensive list of blood work too, where some of the doctors won't run it based on if there's insurance issues or whatever, what could happen there. But yeah, it's sort of important to know these numbers and look at it, especially if you're like most people that we're working with, they've experienced multiple failed IVFs, they've been told donor eggs the only option, and then no one's dug deeper on their health and see why isn't this working, or people have experienced repeat miscarriage and the trauma associated with that. Okay, so we've touched on some of this here, but let's go a little bit deeper. So the what can support then? So we talked about why methylfolate instead of folic acid. Is there anything else you wanted to expand on that? I think we've sort of covered that, but anything else?
Most of the time, patient taking a methylated folate, they are fine. Once in a while, somebody will have a reaction to it. Okay, they take the methylfolate, they don't respond well, and it usually happens fast. Within a few hours, they get agitated. So a good tip is you stop immediately if you notice the methylfolate is not doing, you're not doing well with it. You stop the methylfolate and you take niacin. Niacin is the antidote for an overreaction of methylfolate. So we take a small amount of niacin, and then that should work. So I think that's a good tip. And obviously, under the direction of your doctor and practitioner, you communicate. But that's a good tip for them. There are different forms of methylated folate. If you have a mutation, you avoid folic acid, but if it's folate from natural sources, for example, it's safe because it's from food. You're just not going to absorb everything because you still need to go to the breakdown. If you have a mutation, you're only going to absorb the portion of it, but it's not toxic. So it's safe, it's okay. Or you look at the either the L5 MTHF or the 6S type. Those are the two types of methylated folate that are the best type. Folinic acid is also okay. It's a different biochemical structure. And I always, when I like that they take folate and B12, I always like to take a combination. And some patients also don't do well with methylated B12, which is the methylcobalamin. Most supplements come with cyanocobalamin, which is the cheapest kind. But if they take the methylcobalamin, it's better. But if they do react to it, and sometimes it could be people with mutation MTHFR, but it could be people with COMT that will react to the methylcobalamin. And then they can ask the doctor to take either hydroxycobalamin or adenosylcobalamin, but usually they do very well with hydroxycobalamin if they react to the methylated B12. And then but it's a small percentage that I found, at least with my patients.
What are the reactions? What are you looking at?
Well, most of the time it's also they get fidgety, they get too anxious and hyper. These are the most common. There might be other as well if they don't feel well. I always tell them to, listen to their bodies and see how they feel. So I don't know. Have you found different reactions with your experience?
Yeah, similar.
Yeah. So
what are you seeing around? Let's talk about vitamin B2 and vitamin B6. What are you seeing around that with relation to, I guess, homocysteine and also MTHFR? Anything you wanted to say about those?
Yeah. Yes. So the B6, for example, is very important for the transsulfuration pathway. So it's always good to give a combination of these because then you're supporting all the pathways. But one thing that may drive the homocysteine down, it could be too much B6, because and then you're supporting too much the transsulfuration pathway. So you transforming homocysteine into the cystathionine. That's what the CBS gene does, and the cofactor for that is B6. So you can take a look at that. Maybe you got, a lower homocysteine, not because of an overmethylation, but maybe if you do a blood test and the B6 is off the chart, okay, so you need to balance out. I always, my philosophy is try to have the patient take as little as possible, because every time you take a nutrient, not only you affect that one biochemical cycle that you intend to, but you're affecting 200 others you're unaware of, So we try to minimize a lot of what I do is people are taking 20, 30. I had somebody who was taking 95 tablets per day. Yes, I took a picture, so it was like, whoa. And that particular person had done all these tests on a different lab, and nutrients were totally off, a lot of low nutrients, heavy metals was very high, and all we did, get rid of most of the supplements. It just, stayed with about half a dose of optimized methylation and worked on the gut. And guess what? Within 3 months, the nutrient levels went back to normal. Heavy metals came down back. Everything got regulated by working on the gut and working on methylation. So
Yeah.
less is more sometimes. So
right. And the foundational pieces of this too, right? The stress, the diet, the lifestyle, the sleep, movement, all those sort of things where we can't out supplement those things, and taking 95 supplements is insane. Many people, on the fertility journey are taking heaps of supplements. So that's why it's like you do that DIY generalized approach, but what do you, how do you take a more of a personalized approach so you know exactly what it is and you can take it for a target amount of time, and you're not wasting time or money.
Exactly. Yes. So
yeah.
I've looked at your website and your work, and you do a phenomenal work. So I congratulate you for all the work that you're doing. So yes, people forget about stress, diet, exercise, and all that will affect how their body functions. So it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and then B6 too can be used for high dose. High dose B6 can be used for morning sickness too, which. And what about?
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. And what about creatine and choline? How does creatine impact the methyl groups? What are you seeing there?
Nothing much significance. I want to get your point of view on that. Tell me what you see.
We've got an article here that we have on our website that we've gotten here that we've written. So the creation of creatine consumes enormous amounts of methyl groups. So creatine supplementation may reduce the need for methylation resources. That's what we have on that one. Choline, what are you seeing on that one?
I like to for my patients to get from food. I go back to the oversupplementation. A lot of people, they ask me about all the different genes, for example. Oh, I got a mutation here, or PMT. I got a mutation, CAT. I got a mutation, and I say, okay, hold on. Let's just focus on the basics first. Regulate methylation, and the gut for me is so important. If you regulate the gut, you regulate all these nutrients. You regulate neurotransmitters. So if you do this, and then we need more help, and then we look at the what else we can bring. So I would say 90% of the time or more, we don't need to. At least my experience. So I don't. So I zero in on how I can regulate methylation, which comes down to MTHFR number one, COMT number two, and then gut. And you do that 90 to 95% of the time, we can resolve it.
Yeah, and we see people on the fertility journey like dealing with gut infections, and you can eat the cleanest diet ever, but if you haven't addressed the gut infection, being H. pylori or parasite or
Exactly.
bacteria, like you've got to address that. It's key.
Exactly. So that's my philosophy. It seems like you have the same philosophy
Yeah,
as I have,
yeah,
and once you do that, it's like 95% of the time you achieve the results you get. So
that's right.
I discourage people to start looking at different nutrients, different supplements. I said, let's address that first. And
Yeah. And then, so some medication that's commonly prescribed for people that are on the fertility journey and for people that struggle with miscarriage, they could be recommended hormonal birth controls, metformin, stomach acid lowering drugs, and some of these can deplete the folate and the B vitamins. Anything you want to say about medications?
um, because I do not prescribe medication and I'm not an MD, I'm not trained in medication, so I'm not an expert on medication. However, I do say that it's out there. You can research or ask your doctor research what nutrients each medication depletes, and then you be aware of that because each medication is going to deplete certain nutrients, and you just discuss with your doctor, research, and then find out if you need to take the medication, what do you need to supplement with to counter. Yes.
And then, so testing for what are you seeing for testing there? Like we use the Dutch test, which can be really helpful, and then looking
Mhm.
for the B12 and obviously the blood homocysteine. Like anything else there for testing?
I like folate and homocysteine, vitamin D,
Yeah.
and B12. Those are the main ones. You could add the B6 as well, but those are the four main ones. Homocysteine, folate, D is very important. I consider to be the optimal level. Well, I don't know what level what measurement you use over there in Canada. Here, from most labs, they determine normal D levels 30 to 100,
Right.
but I consider to be 60 to 100,
Yeah.
and the ideal level I like 80.
Mhm.
But and I always recommend patients recommend them to take vitamin D with a K2. So the K helps to put the calcium in the bones and not in the arteries, protect the arteries. So it's always good if they're taking more than 1,000 IU of D, then do D and K2. And in here, at least in California, but not only in California, everyone that I see from all over the country, most of the time they have a low D. It's rare that I get somebody that has a good level of D or high. I almost never get somebody with a high D. Never. And it's interesting. One time there was one person that the D was 150, and I coach doctors from all over the country on only MTHFR and methylation, because that's my specialty. And I saw this a few years ago. I saw this person with 150, and he comes to me and said, "How much is too much?" And I didn't know because all we see is low D. So we always focus, okay, 60 to 100 is ideal, but I said, how much? So I called her. She's an MD that deals with autoimmune, as an ophthalmologist and deals with autoimmune. And some of her treatments was giving high doses of D. So I knew she would know. So I talked to her and said, you know what, when they are doing the treatment, sometimes during the treatment, the patient will have the D up to 300-400 during the treatment, but 150 is not high. And then I did my own research as well and confirmed it has to be 150 for more than 6 months to become toxic. So with that said, I like to play it safe and keep it around 80.
Yeah, exactly. 60 to 80 is we've done many podcast episodes on the vitamin D. It's like key, like you say, to have vitamin D3, K2 to making sure that's really important for immunity and also for egg and sperm. So that is
Yes.
key. And like you, we see it in the single digits, in the teens, and and then people are being recommended IVF, and no one's looked at, well, why is it low in the first place? Gut
Yeah,
infections, autoimmunity, a whole bunch of other things. So,
exactly.
yeah. Okay, is there anything you are personally obsessed with right now, be it a book or a website or a documentary, anything you just would like to share?
No, I think I mean, the number one thing that the goal that I want to share is supplementing with methylated folate instead of folic acid and paying attention on the MTHFR, because I think that will make a big impact on prevention for autism. And this is my biggest goal is to share. I share that. Um, um, I mean, if I can share, we do provide in our website MTHFR testing, cheek swab. They can order home test kits, and we can make it simple. But they can also order through the doctor or any lab, whatever is convenient for them. The most important thing is look into it and take the right supplement. That's my ultimate goal. Yes.
Yeah, the autism piece is, because it is so, as you say, was it 1 in 10,000? Now it's 1 in 44 or 45. So it is an interesting piece, right? To
Really?
be able, especially some people on the fertility journey, that can be potentially scary, but also and you're in a very empowered spot right now where there's things you can do, right, to optimize your health. Any tip for
Absolutely.
someone out there who kind of heard autism and might be like, oh my goodness, what can I do?
Well, I think the number one thing is you get tested for MTHFR, and then you work with a physician to look at all these areas and make sure the methylation is working well. And then you work on your gut and have a balanced diet and lifestyle. I think that's very important. Um, um, Work on activities that helps you with to fight stress. But as far as what you can change, I think really the number one thing is work on your gut and make sure that your methylation is working well. And I think you're in good shape right there.
And you have got a free download here that they can, or a free report, or an ebook they can access. So MTHFR top 10 list of what to do. What can they expect in that? And I'll have the link in the show notes.
Yes, just some nice tips. You got the top 10 tips of what to do for MTHFR. So I wrote that years ago. I don't even remember all the tips, but these are nice. Those are something. There's a very short ebook that will give them some nice points. Yes.
Yeah, because this can be a complex subject. You can just go down a complete rabbit hole of it, but it is to kind of just pull back, like making sure you're taking methylfolate and working on those foundational pillars, knowing your blood work. If your doctor won't run it, get a practitioner that will, and kind of
Absolutely.
empower yourself.
Yes.
Any final thoughts for us here today?
No, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me, and so we can share some good points. Hopefully you enjoyed and your audience.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time. It was
Thank
great.
you.